I went and found every single time Gege Akutami secretly foreshadowed, hinted at, and set up Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo in the original Jujutsu Kaisen story, and in this video I deep dive them all. There are loads of random moments in JJK that make so much more sense to us now that Modulo is officially releasing, but there are also hella moments that could potentially be foreshadowing the future of JJK Modulo 2. I mean, it's no secret that JJK's ending felt very rushed and seemed to have loads of plot points that were seemingly abandoned, as well as creating a load of new plot points that never really got discussed for no apparent reason at all. But little did we know that this was actually Gege laying down a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead us to the next big JJK series known as Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo, aka JJK Part 2, aka Okkotsu Kaisen, aka JJK but with aliens, aka Sukuna level threat. Now, with the numbers this series was putting up and how much the company that shall not be named on this channel loves money, there was no way that they were not begging Gege for a sequel long before the manga was coming to a close. In fact, we can actually work out exactly when in the manga the first ideas for Modulo started being decided, because damn, some of the foreshadowing is genuinely insane when you hit that reread. So, without further ado, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the membership options, and let's jump straight into every single time that Gege Akutami set up and foreshadowed Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. Now, I think Kenjaku was one of the most exciting, interesting, and overall disappointing characters in all of JJK. I mean, imagine being so dedicated to your plan that you literally take on a daily basis, but in the end, not only does your plan completely fall through, but even if it worked, you wouldn't have been alive to see it. Yeah, he got done so dirty. However, he did play a massively important part in setting up JJK Modulo, because I think the first ideas for Modulo actually started appearing around chapter 200, because this is when Kenjaku reveals that Japan has a monopoly on people with cursed energy to the government of the world, and when he reveals that cursed energy could potentially serve as the world's best source of renewable energy. The USA then sent troops into Japan to detain as many Jujutsu sorcerers as they could, and to be fair, they actually did a surprisingly good job against the grade 5 bums, but when faced with strong opponents and cursed spirits, they were cut down with little to no difficulty, because obviously. Gege actually put a lot of time and effort into emphasizing this intervention from the US, which made us all think that it would be very important later on. But it turns out Kenjaku supposedly only did this because when humans die, they release a lot of cursed energy, which then helps, the whole Culling Games plan, and it helps him fuel the merger and all this stuff later on, which I felt like was a very underwhelming reason for us to put this much emphasis on revealing cursed energy to the world and the potential of it being used as renewable energy, and the US wanting to invade and kidnap Japanese citizens. It felt like a lot of build-up for something that was inconsequential in the end. I mean, we literally didn't even settle it or really address it even at the end of the story. But after reading the first chapter of Modulo, it makes a lot more sense that Gege left it open-ended, because it does seem as though Japanese people being targeted and used as literal batteries is going to be an important part of the story. I mean, in chapter 1, we do literally go on a mission to capture a curse user that is kidnapping Japanese children to sell as literal commodities. However, it is pretty unclear how much the series will actually focus on that plot point. But I am very glad it's at least been acknowledged and incorporated into the story. Now, the whole USA cursed energy thieving plot isn't the only thing that Kenjaku is actually responsible for setting up in JJK, because both himself and Tengen are complete anomalies, and in my opinion, it's definitely no coincidence that there is an alien in Modulo who looks just like Tengen and feels just as slimy as Kenjaku. In fact, even the forehead markings on the alien's head look like Kenjaku stitches. I feel like this has to be deliberate. It can't be a coincidence. I think Modulo is potentially going to give us some more Kenjaku, Tengen, and cursed energy lore as a whole, but what I'm really interested in is that one page in Jujutsu Kaisen where Kenjaku looks at Tengen and immediately thinks of Sukuna in his Heian era form. It's done in such a mysterious way that made us all think there was some kind of big reveal coming, but obviously that reveal never came. Considering how these supposedly abandoned plot points are being explored throughout Modulo, though, it's very possible we will actually get some kind of explanation for this moment. That point is kind of just speculation from me, though. It is very tinfoil hat type stuff, so I'm gonna ditch Kenjaku for now and move on to the actual confirmed and crazy foreshadowing. This has to be one of the most insane pieces of foreshadowing that I've ever seen in a fictional story. I'll be real, I really love it. It's very possible that the USA Cursed Energy plotline was actually written with the intention of it being explored in JJK, or maybe that really is all Gege wanted it to be. I feel like it's more like setup for Modulo than actual foreshadowing. The first actual proper foreshadowing we get for JJK Modulo came in the form of a stupid, out-of-pocket joke that Gojo makes towards Sukuna halfway through their fight. At the time, it was just Gojo saying dumb Gojo things, right? Like, it was funny, but it wasn't that deep. Like, you read it and chuckled, and then Loki just forgot he ever said it, because, well, I'm saying that pretending JJK readers actually read what's on screen anyway, but whatever, you sit there and kind of brush it off, you get the point. However, I think it's safe to say that absolutely nobody expected this to be the most insane foreshadowing for anything in Jujutsu Kaisen. In chapter 233, Gojo looks at Sukuna standing between Mahoraga and Agito, and jokes that he looks like a lost alien. Nearly 2 years after that chapter was released, JJK Modulo releases its first chapter, and guess what? Not only are there lost aliens seeking refuge in JJK now, but it's pretty much certain at this point that Maru, or maybe Cross, is the reincarnation of Sukuna. I mean, he isn't actually Sukuna, he's just meant to represent, you know, Sukuna reincarnating and taking a different path like he said he would at the end of the manga, which, to be fair, in itself is kind of nice foreshadowing, but we'll get to that later on. Also, some people think that Maru is Wasuke's reincarnation, and his not-so-nice twin is Sukuna's, and to be honest, I do see that as a real possibility too, especially if Modulo is going to be a redemption story for Cross, but it's kind of too early to tell which is which, and either way you cut it, like, Sukuna has been reincarnated as a literal lost alien. Doesn't matter which one it is. It's kind of crazy that that did happen. I mean, Maru has the markings, he has a twin, his technique is the opposite of Shrine, he made a speech about ideals that was the exact opposite of Sukuna's, and the name of their spaceship, the Naunox, literally spells out Sukuna when you read the Japanese characters backwards. Chapter 257 also gives us, like, more details on the idea of souls reincarnating, because we do know that in some way or other, Wasuke Itadori, Yuji's grandfather and twin to Sukuna, was the actual reincarnation of Sukuna's twin that he ate in the womb. And it was by getting busy with Wasuke's son that Kenjaku managed to birth Yuji Itadori, the perfect vessel for Sukuna. And yes, Wasuke was actually Sukuna's twin, not Jin, which is something that Gege told us later on after the manga had ended. Not really sure why Gege didn't just say it in the chapter itself, you know, instead of confusing his whole audience and inspiring these TikTok readers to be even more confused. But whatever, I don't blame you guys for that one. Gege just doesn't like writing stuff, I don't know. Realistically though, how much more evidence do you need for this idea? No one is convincing me that this random bar about Sukuna being a literal lost alien wasn't directly foreshadowing this, because that is way too much of a coincidence. It's also low-key making me, like, kind of think that the origins of the Ten Shadows technique is something alien too, because Mahoraga is another big mystery in JJK, and if my theory that Yuka Okkotsu has the Ten Shadows technique is true, then there is definitely the potential for some Mahoraga lore drops in Modulo. That bit is, again, just speculation and theory stuff though, but the alien foreshadowing is genuinely crazy, let's be real. The alien thing was the first tiny little breadcrumb that Gege left for us, but once Gojo died and the Sukuna raid started, Gege just started dropping a load of random-ass lore and information on us. At the time, we just thought Gege was dead-ass losing his mind because there was no reason at all for him to be doing all that, as the story was literally about to end. Bro decided to randomly name-drop this bum-ass grade 1 sorcerer called Usami in the middle of the finale Sukuna fight, for shits and giggles. Well, at least at the time we thought it was for that reason, but obviously though this was Gege's attempt at introducing the name Usami to us early on so that we had some context when Usami's son, or grandson, or whatever he is, ended up being Yuka and Tsurugi Sensei in the sequel. The fact it was Kusakabe who mentioned Usami right before he 1v1'd the King of Curses with his broken simple domain is what makes me think that the Usami lineage is actually tied to the new Shadow School and the teachings of Simple Domain, which Gege put stupid amounts of emphasis on throughout the entire finale. The biggest red flag Gege gave us that there would be a sequel is actually within the infamous chapter 269, where we do learn all about the new Shadow School and Simple Domain, and that Kusakabe is the new leader after Meimei killed the old leader, who was apparently stealing her disciples' life force every time they use the technique. I don't know, it started to get proper weird here, I'm not gonna lie. Like, Gege must have actually been losing it, because why is Mei's feet taking up this whole panel, bruv? Like, this is the ending of your life's work, bro. This is your manga, and you're showing us Mei's feet. Whatever you're into, man, like, fine, I guess. But yeah, so Kusakabe got rid of the binding vow that forbade users from teaching the technique to outsiders of the new Shadow School, and the whole life-stealing binding vow got scrapped as well, which was interesting, but at the same time, you know, again, why was Gege doing all that in the third to last chapter of the manga? I don't know. Obviously, it all makes perfect sense now, though, because since Tsurugi is a user of Simple Domain despite having no cursed energy at all, it kind of implies that Simple Domain and the new Shadow School and Usami might be an important topic in Modulo. What could be even crazier foreshadowing from chapter 269, though, is that Mei says Ui, or Wee, or Brian as I used to call him, will one day become the head of the new Shadow School, and that he will charge a subscription service for people to be taught Simple Domain. Once again, it seemed like a funny joke at the time, but considering how Wee would likely be alive in the big 2086, I reckon this has now probably become a reality. In fact, I would not at all be surprised if Mei was actually in Modulo, and was the exact same age she was in JJK, because she made Ui reinstate the binding vow that steals life, and made him basically give it all to her so that she could be a lovely spring chicken with her feet out for the rest of time. Meanwhile, Wee would just wither away as an old man, of course. That does actually seem like a very Mei thing to happen, I'm not gonna lie, I really would not be surprised if we head down that route. But who knows, maybe the reason why Tsurugi with his heavenly restriction can use Simple Domain is because Wee really did create a subscription service and charges people to have Simple Domain imbued into their cursed tools, similar to how Mekamaru was doing it when he fought Mahito. Chapter 269 did not stop there though when it comes to setup, because we also set up a potential clan war between the Gojo and Kamo clans, which again is a crazy thing to drop on us in the last chapters and is one of the main reasons we all were certain Gege would make a sequel, and I do really hope we actually explore what happened between them in Modulo, because the Gojo clan has been mentioned a fair bit, with Yuta obviously being the head of it, at one point in time at least, and the Kamo clan hasn't been mentioned yet at all, so yeah, it looks like the Gojo clan stomped them out, but I hope we'll find out for sure. It was stuff like this that made it so blatantly obvious that Gege was planning a sequel though, because he really had no reason to be name-dropping random NPCs and expanding all of this lore about irrelevant stuff and showing Mei's feet in the final chapters of the manga. Okay, moving on from the Simple Domain stuff, I've just wanted to talk about what I think is one of the most obvious setups for Modulo that Gege introduced in JJK, which is of course the mysterious and unexplained nature of the Okkotsu bloodline. One time in Sendai Colony, Uro told Yuta that he was of Fujiwara descent, which confused Yuta because Gojo told him he was of Sugawara descent, and therefore was distantly related to him. In chapter 261, we then see Gojo telling Yuta that he very well could be a descendant of both the Fujiwara and Sugawara clans, which would mean that Yuta was born potentially even more blessed and gifted than Gojo himself. Which is a crazy thing for Gege to say and then literally never elaborate on it or do anything interesting with it again for the rest of the manga. Especially because we know the Sugawara and Fujiwara clans were not only two of the most powerful sorcerer clans of the Heian era and of all time, but they were also mortal enemies, so the story behind two of them hooking up and, you know, creating the Okkotsu bloodline has so much potential in it to be very interesting. And since Gege decided the main characters of Modulo would be Yuta Okkotsu's grandkids, I do now have faith that Gege put emphasis on this Sugawara-Fujiwara theme in chapter 261 as set up for it to be properly explored in Modulo. Furthermore, and we're entering theory territory again here, since they are Zenin and Okkotsu/Gojo hybrids, I do low-key feel like my theory that the conflict between the Gojo clan head and Zenin clan head many centuries ago could be closely linked to Okkotsu's history, but again, that's just my own speculation. Still though, I do believe Gege's emphasis on Okkotsu's lineage in Sendai Colony and then again in chapter 261, as well as revealing that Yuta later became the head of the Gojo clan, was all done as set up for what we are going to be exploring in JJK Modulo. Which now that I say it, kind of reminds me that the JJK epilogue chapter where we meet Yuka and Tsurugi for the first time was just such obvious and blatant setup for the sequel, but none of us realized it because it was kind of too obvious. It was just hidden in plain sight. We didn't even consider the possibility that that chapter was leading directly into the next stage of JJK, even though it did just introduce us to brand new characters and cool new ideas like, you know, Yuta taking over the Gojo clan. Okay, so I guess the final bits of setup and foreshadowing I found for JJK Modulo were hidden within Ryuman Sukuna. Hell nah, bro. Ryoman Sukuna's ending, which makes a lot of sense considering, you know, one of the twin aliens likely represents the reincarnation of Sukuna himself. First of all, there is the final interaction between Yuji and Pukuna, where Yuji gives Pukuna a chance to continue living inside him. And then the part which stands out to me, which is when Yuji says, living not by cursing someone, but by existing alongside them. This is pretty much exactly what Modulo is all about. We are currently between coexistence and conflict with these aliens, with Maru representing coexistence and Cross representing conflict. The parallels are very clear, and it does seem like this time round coexistence will be the conclusion we reach in order to contrast with the ending of JJK, where Sukuna chose the opposite, being conflict, because at the end of the day he was a curse. As I mentioned earlier, Sukuna's final conversation with Mahito as he walks the path that all souls do in the cycle further serves as important context for Modulo, because this is where the idea comes from that Sukuna learnt from his defeat. Bro, I'm really just losing the ability to talk now. What is going on? I'll try that again. It serves as important context for Modulo, because this is where the idea comes from that Sukuna learnt from his defeat by the hands of Yuji Itadori, and then decides that he should be reincarnated later on. That is not what my script says. Oh my god, bro. No, I'm getting too tired for this now. Okay, screw the script. Sukuna says he wants to walk a different path because he lost to Yuji and got his ass humbled, alright? And I think Modulo is him walking the different path. I hope that clears it up. God, I really am proving that JJK fans can't read. But yeah, I think Sukuna, like, you know, choosing to go north and become someone new is meant to contrast with Gojo, who goes south and remains who he is, because he supposedly died without regrets, and was very happy leaving his dream to be carried on by Yuji Itadori and the next generation. Which, yes, does mean that it is very unlikely that Gojo will be reincarnated in Modulo, so Gojo Glazers, look, I feel your pain, okay, but please do not get your hopes up, right? It's not gonna happen. And that does remind me that I've been seeing comments saying a very, very weird thing, which is that if Sukuna is one of the reincarnated twins, then Gojo probably has to be the other reincarnated twin, right? Which is the most TikTok reader, negative reading comprehension, JJK, like, fan reader logic I've ever heard. Are we hearing what we're saying right now? Sukuna literally already had a twin. If he's gonna reincarnate as a twin, why would it not be with his twin? I think people are forgetting that when it comes down to it, Gojo and Sukuna were just literally, they were strangers. They were complete strangers to each other. They had pretty much no connection to each other at all, other than being the strongest of their respective eras. Like, why would two random strangers reincarnate as twins just because they had a big fight once upon a time? It's so stupid. Anyway, let's just move on before I properly crash out over this. This final conversation with Mahito could also be potentially setting up Mahito as a character that returns in Modulo, because the world is probably due another curse of humans being born, and it would be very interesting to see Mahito recognize Sukuna's soul within one of the twins, and for one of them, probably Maru, to fill Yuji's shoes and put a stop to him. But at the same time, if one of the twins represents Wasuke or Yuji, then him recognizing that soul and having that fight again would be very symbolic too. Basically, if anyone's going to be able to tell that a reincarnated soul exists within these aliens, it's Mahito. Also, it would be interesting because I don't know if you've noticed this, but so far in Modulo, there's been no mention of cursed spirits at all. The word hasn't even been said. They've not been shown. And these aliens, because all of them can control cursed energy, it means they've probably never seen a cursed spirit before, because cursed spirits can only form because of people who leak their cursed energy. People who can control it don't cause cursed spirits to form, so they've probably never seen them before. Anyway, last but not least, there is the fact that we end the story of JJK on a panel of Sukuna's last remaining finger, waiting ominously in a hutch in the woods as the door slowly creaks open. Now, yes, this could easily be for dramatic effect and not bear any relevance to Modulo at all, but I would not be surprised if the finger has a role to play in the story. To be clear though, it is completely impossible for Sukuna to reincarnate via that finger because it no longer is connected to his soul. It is merely a cursed object imbued with a finger's worth of Sukuna's cursed energy. Simple as that. So yeah, that is pretty much every single bit of confirmed and even potential setup and foreshadowing for JJK Modulo that I was able to find within Jujutsu Kaisen's story, which, to be honest, ended up being a lot more than I expected. And yes, a lot of it is still speculation, but there is some just confirmed blatant foreshadowing like the alien thing. Modulo and the topics explored so far in Modulo really are recontextualizing a lot of JJK's ending for me. I'm gonna be real, I have faith in Gege to tie everything up nicely, and I'm really loving it so far, so I can't wait for more. But yeah, that does it. So as always, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to check out my weekly podcast that I co-host with Josh Inbetweener and Orion. Link in the description below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in a bit.